It's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan radio panel, and plenty happening in sport. But I thought we might start today with AFLW, and as I put it to the judge before we started, temperature's rising, and it's not just the external temperature. I've noticed there's a huge groundswell on social media talking about equality and people thinking that the AFLW is getting the raw end of the pineapple, or the sharp end of the pineapple. Specifically, let's look at some special treatment. Collingwood and Carlton being able to fly into WA when nobody else can get in there. What are your thoughts about that, Coutta?
Yes, it's odd, isn't it? It's excuse me. It is odd that we are talking about teams being able to fly in and fly out of WA when the poor residents and people can't actually get in, or they have to quarantine for 14 days in their homes. The AFLW is an interesting situation at the moment, isn't it? I think if we talk about the concessions they've got to go and play in Perth, good on them. Why not do it if they can do it? Those WA teams obviously had to relocate and play a lot of their football out of sight of WA, and now they're able to play at home, which is great. So today, for instance, we've got West Coast and Collingwood over there, and obviously Fremantle played Carlton over there yesterday. The results of the AFLW are probably a concern as well, Professor. And if we're talking equality or parity, then there definitely are some concerns about the lopsided scorelines from this round so far. But going back to your original point, it's amazing that sport, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised, but sport's able to get their way around restrictions, embargoes, and all these sorts of things. And the AFL did it. Rugby league didn't have too many worries about that because they don't play anywhere outside the eastern seaboard. They obviously got the Auckland or the Warriors relocated here, and they'll be able to go back in the middle of the year and be able to play from home. And I think even, Professor, if we're talking about basketball, I think there was issues with the netball. There was issues with the Melbourne Vixens choosing not to go to WA and copping a significant fine for that during their season.
Yeah, you make a good point there with the Warriors, Coutta, because they'd be feeling a bit aggrieved, I'd say, if allowances are being made somewhere. But they certainly have put in the devotion to relocate their whole lives to live in Australia to make it work. But then you have these exemptions, so it is an interesting, perhaps double standards, if you could call it.
It's an odd one though, Professor, isn't it? That we're sort of like during the pandemic, the way that teams were able to be relocated or the plans to relocate were made prior to any announcement being made. There was no sort of secret phone. The bat phone wasn't in existence, was it, between Dan Andrews and the AFL? The number of times that a plane load of players would be ordered to leave within 2 hours, and then later in the day or the next day, there'd be an announcement that we're going back into lockdown. I don't know. It's great that we've got sport going on, but the cynicism around it's like, well, hang on. How's this occurring and how does this happen?
The other thing I've been detecting, Coutta, is that there's unrest in playing conditions. I've read plenty of complaints this weekend about the state of the ground being too hard. That's always going to happen in summer, no matter how much you water them. The heat that the women are being asked to play in, it's 30 plus today. That's probably not going to change very much for the rest of the season. The quick turnarounds, there's one team's going to be asked to play 4 games in 2 weeks. Now, I see that some people have said, oh, well, look, the AFL teams were asked to play in those conditions 2 years ago, but we must remember that AFL lists have 45 players, AFLW lists have 31, which means there's far fewer chances to rest.
Professor, you might be going on to say it, but the other issue, Professor, here is that one lot are professional and the other ones have got jobs.
Yes, I was going to mention that, Coutta. One of the tweets today said that women in the AFLW don't want anything else other than to be treated equally.
Oh, I'm not sure that will happen.
Professor, is it getting to the stage where, and we have talked about this many times, but where the women's game really should start to take control of their own destiny? All of those things you've mentioned, if they happen in the men's game, there'd either be a right, the Players Association will get involved and say, we're not going to play on these grounds and these weather conditions with this kind of turnaround. That's just quite clear. The women's game being played as it is at this time of the year, and this is a pretty mild summer, I think. I don't think this is what by any means a horrible summer. It's getting to the stage, and I've also noticed the crowd numbers are reflective of the fact that people aren't getting to the games. The games, as you mentioned, Coutta, they're becoming uneven. It's just really becoming a sideshow to warm up before the men's season really starts. And I just wonder when the time's going to come, when the penny's going to drop, where the women say, we'll just take control of our own destiny, thanks. This is not working for us at any level, including, as you say, Coutta, financially.
Yeah, it's one that you sort of sit back from afar and like we're all invested in it because we certainly watch it. We know how far it has come in such a short time. The other thing that you got to take into account as well, that next year there's 4 more. I think it's next year. There's 4 more teams coming into it.
Yep.
So all of a sudden we've got more matches that are going to get played. And what's that going to look like for the competition if it stays in its current form? So if there's 18 teams next year, they're only going to play 9 teams, are they? So I suppose this is the great challenge, is that there's no roadmap to say what it looks like going forward. It's just like we've admitted 4 teams. That means that everyone's got a team in the AFLW. What happens going forward? Is the season changed to be in line with the AFL so that everyone gets to play everyone? They're playing a winter sport in winter. The grounds aren't as hard, and we're not seeing the injuries that we're seeing at the moment. The injuries that the AFLW is sustaining are frightening. Whether it's ACLs on the knees, concussions, other injuries like I think there was a collarbone the other day. Now, I'm not sure all of it's contributable to the grounds, but you watch the AFL train, and a lot of them are training in grass cats because they don't need the job. They don't need anything else at the moment.
Coutta, can you see the game improving with 4 more teams? It seems to me there's further dilution of the talent pool, but also a lot more games in what would probably be a similar size season. To me, that can't be a positive thing.
Oh, and the other thing, Judge, out of all that as well, is that we're seeing at the moment that Channel 7 have chosen not to show a significant amount of the games. So if you go and look at AFLW and you want to watch it on Channel 7, a lot of the time it's not on there. It's actually on paid TV, so on the Foxtel. So what happens going forward when there's 9 games? Will Channel 7 just punt that off to another channel, one of their other channels, or just go, well, Foxtel can look after that going forward? I
was just going to say they want to be careful because they've had the initial interest in the comp and the boom. They don't want to do what happened to the Big Bash when people were loving it and watching it, and then they saturated the competition with, wasn't necessarily more teams, but I think they doubled the season, but it was just overkill. And the AFLW is going to be carefully to grow this competition and make sure it's got exposure. We saw what happened with basketball when that wasn't on free-to-air. No one cared. So they want to, as you say, Coutta, they want to make sure it's got the exposure and not overexposure. It's a balancing act.
From an observer's point of view, Coutta, I don't get the impression that the AFL or AFLW have got the grand plan. It seems to me to be every year it's a new idea. This year we'll try this, we'll try that. I just don't get the impression that, in 5 years' time, a 5-year plan or 10 years' time, this is where the game will be. It's just sort of growing like Topsy and without any direction. And I get that feeling the whole competition is directionless.
Is it? It's growing despite itself at the end of the day, I think, Judge.
Yeah.
I think the attraction at the moment, and this is where you would hope it continues, is that we're now seeing girls playing in AFLW that started in Auskick. Now, these girls were trailblazers at the time because they probably went along with their brothers to Auskick and had a kick, and then all of a sudden they kept playing, and they were then able to play mixed football up until sort of under 10s, I think it is, and then all of a sudden they have to make a decision. So you've definitely got a pathway there for them, but what does it look like? Like, does the AFLW go to winter season, and then what impact does that then have on the VFLW? What impact does it then have on the VFL? The below the VFL, the VFLW, sorry. So your Darabins and all those sorts of teams that have always been a really strong feeder. So do they lose out? So if there's no plan in place, there needs to be. And what needs to happen is it needs to be set right. 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we want the sport to be professional. We want our athletes to be given the best possible opportunity to be footballers. We want to support them, whether that's the clubs being able to invest in them. Like we go back to the soft cap and how that's impacted on women's footy as well, as a byproduct. So there needs to be a plan. As you said, there doesn't seem to be one. AFLW looks to be sort of like down the pecking order. I suspect and that the under 18s or under 19s, whatever it is, Judge, is probably more well known in AFLW, and there's probably a plan there for that sort of level, rather than going, right, what's our premier competitions in Australian sport? And it's AFL and AFLW.
It remains a sideshow to the main show, and the AFL is only concentrating on the main show as they see it. Whereas to me, I think to us, AFLW will be the biggest growth of anything the AFL has ever seen. And they continue to be amazed by the success of the women's game. And as you say, it's in spite of what the AFL is doing. It was always going to be thus. It was always going to grow.
The interesting thing, Professor, and you forwarded through this week, was a couple of the articles that Libby Birch from the Melbourne Footy Club has written. So she's written some articles, probably challenged the status quo, Professor would be the right term.
Yes.
And Libby's also on the AFLW show on, I think it's Channel 9, I think it off the top of my head. But she's challenging the status quo, and her articles are terrific. Now, she's someone that probably aspires to something further involved in footy. And if that's the case, then I think all good for her. But why isn't the grand final played at the MCG?
Great question.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a final played at the MCG.
Why is so? Obviously, it's played. It's a bit different, the AFLW to the AFL, where you actually played the MCG, or the previous years. Obviously, we've had some concerns around COVID, so it's been played at the Gabba, and I think, Professor, last year, just off the top of my head, was played at Optus in Perth. I could be wrong, but
yes, correct.
Yeah, I remember that somehow. I don't know why, but you've played. The finals have been played in Queensland, I think South Australia. So if there is a Victorian team, where do they actually play the grand final?
Well, they won't play it at the MCG. But you can almost guarantee that. Wouldn't even be in the AFL's plans. And my question is, why wouldn't it be? Because they would draw a big enough crowd to make it a financial positive as far as the AFL is concerned.
Actually, Judge, sorry, they played one of the final was played when Adelaide won it. I'm pretty sure they played it at Adelaide Oval.
Yeah.
Correct.
And did they get 40,000 for that?
Yes.
It was a massive crowd. I think it was 40,000. Yeah.
And no surprise on this station or for the promotion of the sport, but that was just, and it was an amazing atmosphere.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people had just come off wine tours. I think they were leaving wineries to get in the joint. That was packed. I remember.
But again, that's not the catalyst. That's gone nowhere with that. Does that make sense? That out of it. So the other thing, Judge, is that if you want to go to an AFLW match, and I assume this will be the same for the AFL going forward, is you can't just rock up and buy a ticket anymore. So if you make the decision that you want to go and watch the AFLW on the day, you've got to buy a ticket online. So does that put people off going or buying tickets prior to it? Maybe.
It's a process of education, Coutta, that having done that myself and getting there, being told it's only $10 admission. So I got to the gate and said $10, but you have to have ordered it, online beforehand. Bloody hell. Yeah. Inconvenient, but I'm sure that's the way it's going to go in the future.
Well, I guess the thing is these days, Coutta, that given paper tickets in the past, we're going to a digital age, and almost everybody's carrying a phone that can access websites and ticket purchasing companies. So even if you make the decision while you're out, query that you're probably going to be able to come across a digital ticket and be able to get in, but it takes away from the flavour of just being able to roll up.
When I moved from Sydney 2006, I thought I'd go and watch the Sheffield Shield. I was living in Richmond. I just strolled up the road. There was 9 Australian players on show. There was about that many people in the crowd. But when I got to the desk, there was a couple of older ladies there with a crossword, and they said, it's $5. Or did you get the tram here? I said, no, I walked. She said, oh, it's a shame. It would have been $2. So I was happy to pay the $5. There was 9 Australian cricketers on show, and there would have been not even 3 men and their dog. I think maybe a couple of dogs and maybe 20 blokes. I reckon that not many at all. So times have changed.
Coutta, just let me put this last one to you about equality and inequality. The GWS coach, in rather muted terms, when he was interviewed after yesterday's game, pointed out that his team has played one home game and it's now, as far as they're concerned, the end of round 6. My question is, which AFL team would put up with playing 5 games on the road and only 1 game at home in the first 6 rounds? No team would.
Well, I'll throw this back to you, is that why have we not heard about it? If it was the AFL, you would have heard about it. There would have been 20 different articles written by 20 different people about this. It's doing itself an injustice. I'm looking at the ladder now. It was hard to find the ladder, actually. It's like the website is still pathetic. There's teams that have only played 4 matches, and obviously that's due to COVID and the like. But there's teams that have played 4 matches, and the Fremantle's played 7 now.
I'll tell you what, Coutta, there is one thing that's piqued my interest. People at the AFLW must listen to our program, because you will recollect that I had a conversation with Sarah last week about the AFLW ladder not being updated after the conclusion of games.
Yeah.
I went to the website yesterday. Guess what? The AFLW ladder was updated and was up to date as at the finish of the game. So I suppose one thing good's happened out of all of that.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the ladder now, Professor, and as I said, there's teams that have played 4. As you mentioned, there's a team that's played 5 interstate, just tough. But the St Kilda Footy Club, they get to win a game. They've got a percentage of 42.6%, and they've played 4 matches. Now,
I did predict that they would finish on the bottom of the ladder.
And obviously that they've had some change down at that football club with the change of coach becoming Nick Del Santo. But I would think they'd be very disappointed with their season to date. And obviously they've had a couple of injuries, and they've had some one of their key players with the vaccination mandate. Just she's still researching it. But you look at that, and then you go, the next team has won one game out of 6, and they've got a percentage of 45. The next one's 57%. So the top and bottom, and as we said before, Judge, is that we're going to bring 4 more teams in. Those players, a core will come from the 14 other clubs without doubt. They'll be given some concessions for the draft as well, you would assume. And I think I've read an article this morning, an ex-coach of the Collingwood AFLW professor, I think it was Wayne Seekman. He suggested, and this is very radical, but it might be something you think about, is you start again. Like, you just start again and get everyone into a draft pool, and then clubs get to pick and start again.
Yeah, good luck on good luck on parochial clubs voting on that. That's got no chance of getting through. But I will say this, Judge and Coutta, points well made. It's almost impossible for the newly admitted teams to beat the more established teams. There is a definite divide in that AFLW ladder. The established teams who've been around for nearly all the seasons of the AFLW certainly are far and away have much superior playing groups than the other ones. And what about Choco Williams? How would you beat Choco? Did you see that video of Choco Williams with the AFLW Melbourne team? Could
yeah. So obviously, Mark Williams working with the Melbourne Footy Club for the last 12 months. This week was working down with the girls at Casey, and well, the result yesterday was pretty impressive. So maybe Choco's his magic touch has washed over. But Professor, you talk about the initiation or the initial clubs and the foundation members. We've got in the bottom 4, we've got the Western Bulldogs. Yes, admittedly, they've only played 4 matches, but they've won 1 match. And then the other team that was a foundation club as well, Carlton, they've only won 1 match from 6. So swings and roundabouts a little bit there. No doubt they'll go up. But the clubs that have been able to sustain the success that you're referring to are really your Fremantles, your Adelaides. Kangaroos obviously came in a bit later. And we'd say the Demons are up there because they've been able to sustain by turning their list over or maintaining their core group of experience and being able to turn the list over. So it can change, but I think the challenges going forward for AFLW are rather significant. And unfortunately, let's see the plan. Let's actually see what they're going to do to address what's happening.
Coutta, the women's competition has been 160 years in the making. It's been plasticine together over the last few years. I suggest that the AFL, instead of that idea you had before about totally dismantling it, has a 10-year plan. I think it will take 10 years to actually get the thing right, so that in 10 years, we would have a competition that is a genuine, I wouldn't say rival, I'd say complement to the men's competition. And finally, we have something decent, whereas at the moment, it is an unholy mess. It's going nowhere. There's no direction. If the AFL can't do it, give the job to us. We'll take care of it. And I think, Professor, between certainly the 4 of us, we could devise a 10-year plan for the AFLW, and it might actually look like something decent in 10 years.
Well, Judge, just butting in there, Coutta, I don't know what I was just about to say, well, if it's the 4 of us, the first person that Dalligan will bring in is Peter V'landys.
Absolutely will. Yeah. In fact, we may make it a one-person group, Peter V'landys.
I think he's been watching too much Strictly Ballroom or Dancing with the Stars, because he's come up with a horse race called the Big Dance on the day of the Melbourne Cup. I don't know what he's on about.
It'll be a success. Coutta?
Just there is a women's footy vision that I've just come across, a document that's been published by the AFL, Women's Footy Vision 2021-2030. Let me have a look at it, and I'll come back to you on it, Professor.
So there is a 10-year plan.
Coutta, I've had a look at it. It does nothing to address the top end. It's got it does a lot to address women coming through the system and getting to the AFLW. Doesn't address much of the problems of the AFLW. But yes, please have a look at that and come back to us next week with it.
Yes, I think you're right, Professor. I think it's that's the case. But
a lot of motherhood statements.
Yeah.
And I must say, I haven't heard of this before. Perhaps I don't read enough stuff, but I'm not aware of this.
I'll share it with you, Judge.
Thank you. Yeah,
we might come back to it next week once Sarah's back.
Yeah, and I'll just provide the vision. The vision. This is their vision. Judge. Empower and enable the women at all levels. No,
please. If I hear the words mission statement and vision statement again, I think my head will actually explode.
All right. Well, we don't want that to happen, Joe.
Don't want that to happen.
You can play management bingo. That's my favourite going forward.
Bingo.
It's very hard to go backwards unless you got the time machine, Back to the Future style. I hate that going forwards expression. You can't go back.
Sorry, Professor. The Dilbert comic has got a mission statement builder, and you just spin it, and it just tells you all of these lines to throw in there, and you throw about 6 sentences in. Done.
I bet I can pick a word that's on there. Ready? Synergies. I didn't know what that was.
All right. We might leave the AFLW there. Paul, NRL is back. I switched the TV over last night, and I was very pleased to see that a live match, the NRL All-Stars, you must be happy that it signals the season is not too far away.
Well, we will talk about your tipping later, but I did predict the Maoris at nearly $3 last week for the punters out there. On a sad note, it was a tribute game to Olsen Filipana, who was one of the pioneers of Maori players in the NRL. I was reading a nice story about Olsen this morning that the racism, well, not nice, but it's nice how much the game's changed. The racism was so bad that his phone bill in the early days of his career back to his mum in New Zealand was more than his contract was. Because he was just copying so much. But all credit to Olsen. He never fought back because he didn't want to give his people a bad name. He was baited mercilessly. His nickname was the Galloping Garbo, if you don't mind, because back then they used to have full-time jobs to pay just to pay his phone bill, it sounds like, for Olsen. But it was an amazing game. It was a very good standard. And a statistic for you, Professor, there are 46% of the NRL players are either Pacific Island or Maori background. So it may not surprise that the Maori team, despite not looking on good at the trusty old phrase on paper, they came out and they had the spirit and they won the game. That's not to say the Indigenous team didn't play with spirit. What I particularly enjoyed seeing was Andrew Fafita back on the field, like a wrecking ball. It was 6 months ago he almost died. He was hit in the throat, and it was very close to curtains for Big Andrew on the sideline when he was choking, and the paramedics thankfully got there in time. So a few stories to come out of it. Joseph Tapine, Ricky Stewart's hoping that he'll get the double jab because he hasn't got that done. That's going to impact his ability to play this season. I think Ricky Stewart might go and get a couple of syringes himself from Amcal and just get them into Joseph. He played that well, but that's an issue for Joseph and his anti-vax stance. Cody Nikorima was fantastic for the Maori team. Nathan Brown at the Warriors has quite a conundrum. He's got 4 halves to fit into 2 holes over there at the Warriors, but it's better to have more talent than not enough. It was a really good match, and there wasn't going to be golden point, which made it even more exciting at the end, with the Maori holding on for a 16-10 game. If anyone wants to dare suggest it's a Mickey Mouse or not a real spirit, they only just had to watch the haka to start the game, or to end the game as well. And also the Indigenous had a native dance as well, which certainly was inspiring. So I loved it for the game. I love that we've come a long way from who appear to be tough men on the outside. Olsen Filipana having to phone the mum because he's so upset about the racism. We've come a very long way, Professor, and that's a great thing for sport and our society.
Paul, explain to me why the Polynesian Maori players are so good, given that I would have thought, I don't know this, that like New Zealanders, rugby union is their first game, but they seem exceptionally good at league. Is that a conundrum, or is that what's always been the case?
I think what it is the majority of those players wouldn't be from New Zealand. They'd be of that heritage from Australia and raised in social. If I meet someone from Sydney who says they're rugby union, I could almost tell you with at least 90% accuracy what parts of Sydney they're from. And don't worry about the Range Rover or the Horse and Hound subscription. Or the hyphenated name. They're normally easy giveaways. These players probably weren't raised in those areas. And if you look at the Panthers, they had quite a few Maori Pacific Island background players, and that's a long way from your Range Rover territory, Mount Druitt. And there's no Horse and Hound subscriptions in I wouldn't think, being delivered into those letterboxes. So it is a cultural thing, but it's more a socio-economic explanation as to those players would come through rugby league areas. And the reason why they're so successful, Wally Lewis, who was the best player in the world at the time, said that Olsen Filipina made the Kiwis unbeatable. And that was right at a time when Australia was desperate for an opponent that could stand up to them in rugby league. Olsen Filipina was that good. It's a combination of size, strength, similar to the Indigenous players in the AFL, that the size, strength, and just, I think, the muscle tone, muscle twitch, they're just different way of running, and it's just a different physical capabilities that make them almost unstoppable. And Joseph Tapino last night was unbelievable. Andrew Fafita, I mean, try stopping him. He's fast, he's quick. Fast and strong, exceptionally good hands. So that's on the Aboriginal side. It was a really good match, and I hope you enjoyed it, Professor.
I did, Paul. One thing I did learn was about Morgan Harper. He did an interview after the game. He'd be the leader in the NRL Oral Hygiene Award for 2022. He said that he cleans his teeth before he runs out to play the match. There was actually vision of him doing it last night in the rooms before he ran out to play. And they said, why do you do that? He said, oh, in the warm-up, you get a nasty taste in your mouth. I don't like going out on the pitch like that.
And he's got a moustache up there with yours as well. He looks like a 70s porn star, but no, he's a very good player, and they've all got their own habits. I'm sure there's worse things that happen in dressing rooms. Of course, Benji Marshall had his Rubik's Cube solving, so we've got Morgan on the Oral B, I guess. So interesting places to be, the NRL change rooms.
So the next major match coming up will be the Charity Shield, Paul?
Yes, and that's another great game, more to see where the Rabbitohs and the Dragons stand. They won't want to be too full on in that match because all eyes are on the season kickoff, which is only a few weeks away. So the Charity Shield will be a good match, but I don't think either the new Rabbitohs coach or the Dragons coach will want to be giving too much away in terms of their output, their pack and their strategies and the way they're going to play. But it still is a good spectacle.
All right. Thanks for that, Paul. Gentlemen, I distributed before the show some articles on concussion in sport. I thought I was going to start with the AFL, but I thought I might start with the cricket one first because that just seems to be totally bizarre. We know that Pekovsky's had trouble with concussion being hit by cricket balls. And so when I saw the headlines that he would be out with concussion again, I thought, oh, look, he's walked into another cricket ball. But no, he's been hit in the head by a soccer ball. Now, I know that they use soccer balls prior to matches to get their reflexes working and to quicken things up. Surely he wouldn't have tried to hit a soccer ball with a history of concussion. What are your thoughts, gentlemen?
I don't know if he's heading the ball or not, but I think it shows how delicate the situation is. If a relatively minor impact can result in what he feels like a concussion symptoms, I think it's time for him to hang the spikes up, unfortunately. He's had 11 concussions. He's not very old, and he only has to have a look around to see how damaging head injuries can be. So he's going to have to weigh up whether he wants a life after sport or a life in sport, which could be very, very dangerous for him.
For those of us who've done torts at uni, we always remember the eggshell skull rule, which is basically you take your plane if you find them. If you have a person who is predisposed to being injured more easily than other people, well, you take your plaintiff as you find them. As an employee of Australian cricket, this kid, it seems to me that he has a particular predisposition to concussion injuries. Therefore, it's more likely that he's going to be injured more than other players and for lesser reasons. For that reason, I would think it's as straightforward as anything that he cannot play the game of cricket, certainly the level that he plays it, where the ball flies around at 150 kilometres per hour, very often at your head because they know he's got a weakness in that area. And of course, bowlers can't help themselves. They'll play to a weakness. Now, that weakness could not so much kill him, but I think almost doubtless will give him long-term problems, which he won't be able to avoid himself. Sports people want to play sport, and they'll always play sport. They won't take themselves off the field. At some point, you have to be taken off the field. Otherwise, I can see Prokofsky and Paddy McCartan leading the inevitable class action is going to be in relation to concussion injuries.
So you're suggesting the very competent Cricket Australia should shut him down?
Yeah, very competent. They got it. You know, I've often said this, sport is run by idiots. Well, the top of the pack is surely Cricket Australia. And the Langer thing, well, I probably won't go into that today, but it's just exemplified that if we needed further examples. But yeah, look, it's a worry, Paul. If it turns out that he's so darn good and our stocks get so darn low, they won't be able to help themselves. They'll keep playing him.
Well, that's where you make a good point. The same way bowlers don't want to take themselves off, he's very unlikely to come out and say, I don't want to play cricket.
Paddy McCartan's lined up again, as I understand, with Sydney, Professor. So yes, they won't take themselves off the field.
Yes, that's right, Judge. McCartan is now on Sydney's AFL list. He was only on their VFL list last year, but he's been promoted to their AFL list. So we can only watch that space with trepidation as to what might happen. But given his history, what bookie would be betting on that he gets through a season without getting a concussion?
Professor, I see that AFL is setting up through Peter Gordon an insurance fund. Personally, I think that's the wrong way to go. Well, what it virtually says is we know there's a problem. We know we can't solve it. There's going to be injuries. There possibly will be deaths. There's going to be long-term trauma to players. Let's get an insurance scheme. Personally, I'd like to see the players not get the need for that scheme.
Yeah, there's 30 players retired from concussion that is in an Age newspaper article this morning. Peter Jess, who's been very vocal on this subject, has been calling on WorkSafe Victoria to prosecute the AFL because they, as you rightly point out, may have breached their duty of care. Just imagine the press behind WorkSafe Victoria actually deciding to do that, and thereby they'll face a prosecution. That'll be a trough for lawyers, I would have thought.
The difficulty, Professor, which they'll always say is that CTE can only be analysed post-mortem. That's changing. Very soon, the scientists say they'll be able to establish CTE pre-death. And I think once that happens, well, for start, it's all over for NFL. And I think the AFL will have to make some substantive changes to the way the game's played. Personally, I think AFL can make the changes. Not sure about rugby league, Paul. Probably still can, although they seem to be very protective of the head, for instance, these days. But there's so many incidental injuries in rugby league to the head. I don't know. What do you think?
I still think NFL's the worst one because even what appears to be not an adverse impact, it's like a mini car crash, just helmet to helmet. And I also find surprising after a touchdown or whatever, when someone does something well, they knock helmets. Like, you're already doing it a couple of hundred times a game. Don't add more to it. But they have been very strict on the head with rugby league, and shoulder charges, which are a big cause of concussions, are out completely. So if you cock your elbow and there's impact, because you can be concussed, as you know, without direct impact to the head. You can be hit so hard that it can still concuss you. So shoulder charges used to lead to those massive hits that everyone would go, whoa, about, but they cause a lot of damage. So I think NFL would be the sport most at risk. It makes the most money, though, of more sports than almost any on the planet. So let's see if health trumps money.
Professor, I think that one thing we have, well, I'll say it now, I think the bouncer has to go. The ball above the head, by the way, most players don't, in lower cricket, it's not part of their armoury. But when you can get a ball at 150 kilometres an hour or faster, that's doing some serious damage. I know we've got helmets, but the mere fact that projectile is hitting you at that speed, I think it's unacceptable. And I don't think cricket will be much the worse by not having the bouncer. Coutta, am I speaking heresy, or what do you reckon?
Oh, you watch from afar with this, don't you? The whole concussion, and it's just not confined to one sport. Obviously, we're talking here about Will Bukowski and a bit of a Glenn McGrath moment with the pre-match warm-ups. He didn't step on a ball; he copped a soccer ball to the head. You talk about the bouncer, Judge, and do you actually practice? Do you actually practice for the bouncer as a cricketer? Do you go into the nets and you get the ball machine to bowl bounces at you, and then when you come to match day, you then try and hit it? Like, it used to be, well, they've limited it, haven't they? They've limited the number of bounces you can bowl to and over shoulder height, I think it is. And if it's overhead high, I think it's called a wide. So that's one step they've done, but you're taking away, and people will say you're taking away from the bowler another opportunity or another part of their armoury is that short pitch ball, because it allows them to square a player up or to give them that doubt rather than pitching, whether it's half track or whatever it is. But again, society's changing, isn't it? Society's adjusting to the head and the concussion. Judge, I don't know if you saw an incident last week. I think it was in the Brisbane Collingwood game, and a girl was knocked out. A Brisbane girl was concussed, both going at the ball, and it hasn't been raised. It wasn't no suspension or anything like that. I'll try and find it. If that was the AFL, there would have been an uproar that there was no action taken. So again, just that slight thing, but yeah, the NFL, Paul said, is they've really restricted the number of head high hits by the helmet on helmets now. A personal foul, I think you get a warning, don't you, Professor? I think it is, or a personal foul. So if you get two, then you're booted.
Could take your ball machine analogy. Imagine little Johnny coming home these days to his mum as a 14-year-old and said, "Oh, we've got a new thing of training, a cricket training now. Got a ball machine that does a bouncer and straight in my head." And the idea is that when we get bouncers in the real game, we have to be ready for them. I had you go, "Oh yeah, well, he hit me in the head 10 times, but I hit 15 to fine leg." That'll be the end of that straight away.
And surely we don't need to go any further back. And is Phil Hughes. Like, all the players still refer to it and talk about it as being one of the worst moments in their careers being there. And every year they do the remembrance or the remembering of Phil Hughes. But what have we learned from it?
It's interesting with Bukowski and the advancements in technology for the helmets. If you look at what they used to wear, well, they didn't even used to wear helmets in the Windies, which I think if there's one place you want a helmet, it'd be facing up to the West Indies bowlers in the 80s in the West Indies. But it's just, is it bad luck given that advancement in technology for the helmets about Bukowski?
Oops.
just lost him.
I think Paul's point, though,
Yeah.
is obviously there's been these advancements in the helmets, and they've now got the attachments on the back of the helmets to guard that vulnerable area just behind the ear. But that means they're most likely getting hit when they're ducking out of the way of a bouncer, isn't it? Not or when they're playing it. So we could talk about concussion, right, most weeks, and still talk about it and still be topical. There's no clarity around it in world sport from what I can see. Professor can talk about the survey or the studies that they did in America on the NFL. And I think, Professor, that was out of 199 had suffering, didn't they, or symptoms? And the one that wasn't didn't finish the test or something, was it?
Yeah, there was some crazy number. Coutta.
Sorry, Coutta. I'm just thinking when the helmets came in of Tony Gregg, and with that scooter helmet that he had on his head, and the bowlers just thought, good, now I've got something to really aim at that South African English twit, and it was worse because they were aiming straight at that helmet.
Well, he used to have the St. Peter logo on the helmet right above his bonds, so he'd actually be targeting the SP on the helmet. But you look back and you think of the other helmets back in the day, like Alan Border. Remember, he never used to wear a chin strap.
Yeah.
And how far they've actually come, but for him to still be getting concussions and the like, at some stage, he's got to make a decision and show you the health. Sorry, Professor, if he doesn't make it, shouldn't Cricket Australia be making it on his behalf? Well,
isn't Pekowski in the same boat as McCartan? Surely they are two sports people who should give serious thought to never playing a sport again that involves any sort of concussive element.
Well, and on the Pekowski one is that this season he did commentary for the Big Bash and was more insightful than those that have been doing it for years. So there's a career there for him, and most likely there's also some coaching he could probably do. But cricket commentary, you're not going to get any issues with that, I would have thought. So, and then the Pat McCartan one, like, I hope, Professor, I hope that he gets a good run at it and that we're not talking about his retirement through concussions, because that would just be, I think that would be an indictment on the competition.
I'll tell you what, Coutta, McCartan plays. Imagine you're a fullback playing against him and McCartan's running with the flight of the ball at you. Duty of care. You step out of the way and say, you can have it, mate. I'm not going to be the guy that knocks you out and puts you in hospital for the last time.
Oh, well, the issue you've got, Judge, as well with Paddy is that his peripheral vision's so poor.
Yeah. He can't help himself.
No, and that's one of the issues with him. So, I think, Professor, like you look at the rugby league, and we talked about Martin Lang, Lang before, the way that he would get the ball and he would just run straight. There was no sidestep. There was no ability to run off the line or anything like that. He would run straight. The opposition would know he's running straight, and they would actually go like hammer him. And he had so many concussions time and time again that I think it forced an early retirement. The other thing, and it's a shame we haven't got Paul, is that in rugby league, they talk about the head bin in rugby league when you've got a head high hit or the doctor deems you to have an issue, that you go to the bin and you do all the protocols and the tests and all that. Some of the players that have been put in the head bin and then been allowed back on is such a poor look. It is horrible.
Peter Jess says 30 days after a concussion. The league's now saying 12, but even that, again, is the league isn't following the science.
Well, and that's right, John, because remember, we had Alexandra Gotts on who told us that 12 days wasn't long enough. Now, she's an expert in the field.
Well, the AFL apparently knows better.
Yeah, they asked somebody who said 12 days.
Professor, it's interesting because that rule, the concussion rule at the AFL, is then filtered down, Judge, to local community grassroots sport. So that if we have a child that gets concussed, they've got no choice. They've got no choice. They've got to do the protocols exactly the same as the AFL. Now, wouldn't it be better that they have to get the test done and everything like that, but they do the 12 days as well?
Okay.
Paul's now back. Coutta, you might
again. No, phone charger wasn't working. Sorry, and then just gone.
We're missing you talking. It's yeah.
Coutta, you might like to put that NRL question again or statement.
Yeah, we'll just,
Paul for his comment.
Just going back. We've talked about him before on the show. Paul is Martin Lang. The way that he used to play the game, and no ability to sidestep or unless he chose not to, but he would just run straight at lines, and the collision hit that he would have resulted in numerous concussions.
He would make a Hezbollah rocket look like an olive branch. He would just straight whooshka, just every single time, and his head would snap back to the point where it almost hurts watching him, like watching a car crash. Just that their head would go, and how he seems to be, touch wood, hopefully for him, okay now, is geez, he took the risk. Yeah, but that was his style. He just ran. He just never. I don't think he passed a ball in his life. He just ran in at like a kamikaze just to break it all up. And yeah,
you raised a point with him though. The actual, if you ever get to watch it, Judge, is watch him run, and as Paul described it, his head rocks back.
Yeah,
and he would do that 10 times, 15 times a game. Get the ball, run it up, make his 10 metres, quick play of the ball, and he would be, it was just, you look back on it now, Paul, and you go, how did he do it? How did he keep doing it each week?
That was back in the time before there were doctors to say you're not right to get back out there, because I'm sure, who was it that was saying they don't remember 3/4 of their game? I'm trying to remember the famous player. Oh, Willie Mason. He just so many concussions. He actually doesn't remember playing in 3/4 of his matches. Now, Martin Lang would have to be similar if you asked him, I'd say.
Well, I say those accidents, Coutta, are like driving your car into a wall, a brick wall of 40 kilometres an hour. You know that 10 times in an afternoon. You're not feeling too great.
Yeah, and obviously the NRL and Paul were talking about it. They've obviously made some changes around what they call the head bin. They've now got the HIA. But even so, there's been cases where a player has been knocked senseless and 20 minutes they're back on the ground as though nothing's happened.
These days, if they had the HIA, the doctor would be out there more often than Alan Langer. He might as well just stay on the field waiting for the next run with his, what's your name? Where are you? Every tackle.
All right. Gentlemen, Super Bowl tomorrow. The LA Rams playing the Cincinnati Bengals. Coutta,
yes.
Who will win that and why?
Oh, it's a bit of a game amongst those that some underdogs and some good news stories, and it's those that probably, Professor, at the end of the day, didn't expect to be there. So one thing I find with American sport, Judge, and you might correct me here, but the ability to be able to find the parents sitting in super boxes at American events is second to none. And the whole family's always there, the daughters, the sisters, the grandmothers,
Annie Lou.
Yeah, like it is one of the most amazing things you'll see is that the family books a super box for everyone to be there, and they get the vision of them hugging each other, and you would think that they'd actually played the game. But anyway, I think the LA Rams, they might have a home field advantage, Professor.
Yeah, they do. They do, Gil. They do, Coutta.
Yeah, that's rare, isn't it, in the sport of the NFL?
Second time in 56 years. There you go. It's ever happened, and the first time last year.
Take it the right way. It's probably like the AFL Grand Final where 80% of people don't go for either team because the tickets are so hard to get. I don't think it's going to be full of Rams fans if it's so hard to get tickets. But of course, they're playing at home, so there's always an advantage in being able to drive from your house. I know Tom Brady said it was nice getting out of his pajamas, jumping in the car, and going to the Super Bowl that he won with Tampa Bay. Be nice getting out of bed with Gazelle as well. That's another issue. But I think that the Rams will win. I think that Joe Burrow, the Bengals quarterback, you'll see more sacks than China Post, I think, tomorrow. I think he's going to be knocked around a lot. So I just think the Rams are a very complete team. The only query is Stafford, their former Detroit Lions quarterback, isn't proven on the big stage because he never got there with Detroit. That's the only query, but he's got such an amazing team around him. I think the upstart Bengals, as they call them, there's just a few holes that might be exposed. And Aaron Donald for MVP for the punters, Professor, he'll be the one terrorising Joe Burrow tomorrow.
It's interesting, Professor, that halfway through the season, one of the great defenders in Von Miller was wallowing away at Denver, the Denver Broncos. He now finds himself Super Bowl, playing in a Super Bowl and potentially on the winning team with the favourites. Much loved player, and all of a sudden, 7 weeks later, I think he's now got the opportunity to win a Super Bowl ring.
They've gone all in. If you want to use a casino analogy, they've gone all in for this year, this team, this window. I mean, of course, next year they'll have a chance, but they have got everything on the table just to make this team win. They went after, just as you said, Coutta, one of the best players. You'd never thought he would have been prized out of Denver. He was an icon there. And somehow he's landed, as you say, in a Super Bowl. It's because I don't think I've ever seen, following NFL for nearly 40 years now, a team go such all in for one season than the Rams.
And Paul, that's where it's so different, isn't it? They've actually gone all in. They've been able to recruit during the season as well. To
trade picks as well. They've sold their future to make it work now.
And that includes getting Matthew Stafford to the Rams.
Yeah, he's the query. But the Bengals, of course, are very good to make it that far. And momentum's a powerful thing in sport, any code. So he's got no shortage of confidence, which you'd need as a quarterback. That Burrow's already into the cigars, I think Tony Soprano style a few weeks ago, saying we're going to win it all. So he won't die of wondering. But I just think he's going to have a very tough match because the big men in front of him aren't really as good as what he needs to protect him. Great story, very quick. Troy Aikman used to take out his offensive line for dinner if he didn't get sacked. And he used to say it was $10,000 well spent. And the boys would be having 6 T-bones, and that was just an entree. But it was money well spent if he didn't get sacked. So I can promise you Joe Burrow will be seeing some sacks tomorrow. And
Judge, we're very lucky in Australia that we've been able to send over the doyen of the Australian media or sports media, Jared Waitley, to actually commentate the game.
Right. Not Andy Marr.
No, Andy Marr. No, I think he's got a bit too much on his plate, Andy Marr. But
he's now an expert in snow-related events. Professor, I know as much about these teams as I know about Penguins. But interestingly, for the second time ever in the Super Bowl history, the quarterbacks are number one draft choices. And you would think that would happen all the time, that the number one draft choice we're facing off. The last time was Peyton Manning squared off against Cam Newton back in 2014. I just thought that was an extraordinary stat because I always thought the number one was always.
Well, that could give the Bengals hope because Stafford was a number one draft pick about 15 plus years ago and he hasn't got anywhere near a Super Bowl. So he's the only query for mine on the Rams.
Why aren't the Bengals called the Tigers? Their logo is Tigers. Bengals are only famous for Tigers.
There's a big uni over there, Clemson, I think, who are the Tigers, so they might have already claimed that name.
Thought that might have been it. And why are the others called the Rams? I thought that was a really great name, except as you're talking about the round of the heads, as we were talking about before, or something else going on there.
Well, they've been around quite a few cities. I don't know the origin of their name. They used to be St. Louis. They're now LA. Do they have anywhere else they stopped on their travels, Mark, Professor?
Well, they came from LA to start with. They went from LA to Los Angeles.
St. Louis.
Yeah, to St. Louis, yeah.
it's hardly sheep country in LA. But there you go. Anyway, just
Professor, who are you tipping in the big game? Yeah, this big game that's irrelevant. It seems to have become quite relevant to the Australian sporting scene.
Well, it's got to be quite relevant to the Australian sporting scene, Coutta, if they've seen fit to send Jared Waitley over there, surely.
Well, absolutely. He could commentate any sport and he would manage to get some big words into it. Have no fear of that.
Professor, you're tipping my Fedfast will survive the Super Bowl. Be a first. Well, since I turned 18 anyway.
No,
I'll wash a hot dog down with a ginger beer, root beer. Maybe.
Right. Two answers to questions that have been raised just in this segment. The Rams originally started out in Cleveland. They were the Cleveland Rams, and the first owner of the team called the team the Rams because after the college, Fordham College had a team called the Rams, and he'd been to Fordham, so that's why he called the Rams that name.
Thank you.
That answers those two questions. Yeah, I'd take the Rams and -4. That's what I'd take. I think it's currently showing about $1.95.
I was going to say that Cleveland now has a team called the Browns. Is that a black sheep reference or something? I don't know. I won't even. I don't know why they're called the Browns. It's a strange name.
All right, we might finish.
Professor,
Yep.
a quick one for you, Professor. The Washington name change this week, or it's announced this week via social media. The Washington,
the Commanders, the Washington Commanders.
Yeah.
Commanders. Oh.
So they've had how long to come up with a name, and they've come up with that?
Nearly 3 years.
One of my boys had to go Commander yesterday. I don't think it's Commando, sorry, but yeah, there you go.
4 different professional companies engaged. Couta's come up with it. It was a fourth one that came up with it.
They would have reached out to people to judge.
Oh, reached out. Beautiful.
Management bingo.
In bingo, he's got the points.
Broke to stakeholders. What's a stakeholder? I never know. I still don't know what a stakeholder is. Someone that charges around with a stick. Anyways.
Well,
but no, I was quite fascinated that they took so long and came up with that name.
Is there still an ice hockey team, the Blackhawks? That's got to go, surely.
well, and the Braves.
Braves, they've got to go too.
They'll all go one day. In any event, gentlemen, Gelding's tips. Sale, race 7, horse 3, Kentucky Casanova with Brett Preble aboard. Werribee, race 2, horse 9, Screaming Diva. And race 5, horse 2, Run Amigo. Damien Oliver's riding in the first at Sale. The only ride for the day, probably hasn't gone for a haircut. And Jamie
hasn't gone to try the cheese down there. Just one race for Oliver.
Yep, and Jamie Carr riding in the second. So a couple of the star jockeys gone down to Sale today. Thanks for
she's booked an Airbnb tonight. That's her reason. That's all right.
Thanks for the discussion today, gentlemen. And until next